Hello, everyone, and welcome to a post-Christmas edition of Madden and Benz Unfiltered. Tim Benz and Mark Madden with you. Hope you had a good holiday. We're back at it a day late after Christmas, but plenty to talk about in the wake of the Steelers' victory going back to Saturday against the Cincinnati Bengals. Mason Rudolph versus Kenny Pickett, the conversation, the debate that everybody is having. Although, Mark, I don't think it should be a debate. I think it should be Rudolph without even having to think hard about it.
Well, Ben Roethlisberger said it should be Rudolph, which you knew he would. Remember that part where Ben said he was rooting for Pickett after not at first?
Yes.
Well, Ben was lying. He's not rooting for Pickett. And you're right. I think it's a non-debate, but I don't know. I mean, I think it's 50-50 who starts. What say you?
Yeah, I do think it's 50-50 from an organizational point of view. I could definitely see Tomlin walking out there today and say that the plan is going to be that if Pickett's healthy, he gets the job back. I could also see him playing coy and leaving it up to a game-time decision. That wouldn't surprise me at all.
Well, I think that's most likely. I think what happens is if Pickett doesn't start, the injury is used as the excuse, whether valid or not. In other words, he could be fine, but if they decide to just go with Rudolph, then Pickett's injury is the quote-unquote reason, however, not legit.
One thing I could see happening if they were to go back to Pickett is them using the excuse, them using the rationale that the Bengals weren't prepared for Rudolph going deep. The Bengals were looking for them to go over the middle and use Freiermuth a bunch because that's what had beaten them before, and just say that basically Mason beating them was a consequence of matchups and it was a one-off. I could see them using that.
Well, that, of course, is nonsense, and it's discrediting the guy who had their best game as a quarterback since Ben retired, since before Ben retired.
Agreed. I think that was the best quarterbacking game we've seen since then.
Yeah, I mean, if they don't start Rudolph, it's a bad decision, period. And it will contradict their long-executed philosophy, Tim, that they never look past the next game, that the most important thing is to win the next game. Well, the guy who gives you the best chance to win the next game is Mason Rudolph.
Right, because this would be the primary reason to go away from Rudolph and go to Pickett is simply for establishing, cementing the theory that he's the starter long-term. But even that long-term starting status, Mark, to me, doesn't extend beyond the middle of next year. If he's no good by the middle of next year, then they're going to have to start looking for somebody else because they're not going to extend him. So what game are we playing here, really?
Well, Tim, they're going to start him through all of next year just to decide whether to extend him or not. Not extend him, but pick up his fifth-year option. But he's not the guy. He stinks. I mean, how long do we go before we say the obvious, which is that Kenny Pickett stinks? He's had 24 games to prove himself. When people say that he shouldn't lose the job because he's hurt, I say he's never really earned the job in the first place. He's never done anything to keep it. He just isn't a starting quarterback in the NFL. Now, I'm not saying Mason Rudolph is, but given the game he played this past week, I'd want to find out if he could play another one.
Now, Mark, all this about the quarterback is in the bubble of whether or not they still legit have a playoff chance. They technically do. They're in 9th place right now.
I think it's more than technical, Tim. If they win out and Jacksonville loses a game, they're in.
And then the other two teams have to split, right?
But they play each other.
They play each other the last week of the season, right?
Yeah, so both of them would have to win 10 games for the Steelers to be out if the other things occur, and that can't happen.
Right, so but they'd lose a tiebreaker head-to-head to all three of those teams. Should have come down to that. Jacksonville, the Colts, and the Texans.
Now, the way I understand it is if they win out and Jacksonville loses or ties, they're in.
I thought they needed one more. One of those two teams had to lose at least once, the Colts and Texans.
Tim, I didn't research it a lot because I just don't care. but that's what I've read a bunch of places.
It's just they're in the same spot that they were last year with the AFC East teams that they are this year with the AFC South
and they don't deserve to make it. I mean, the records are what they will be. But, Tim, they lost to 2-10 teams in a row at home. And now I read the usual suspects tweeting, if this team gets in the playoffs, it can beat anybody. I mean, kiss my tuchus in hell with that crap. That's just ridiculous.
No, they can't just beat anybody in the playoffs. I think part of the reason people are writing that, advancing that, saying that is that the teams atop the AFC, aside from Baltimore right now, have all made themselves look vulnerable by playing poorly recently. But, that doesn't mean that the Steelers are going to go in there and beat the Dolphins. The Steelers are going to go in there and beat the Chiefs. That's not going to happen.
Tim, the reason people are saying that is because they're pandering twits who think that's what they need to do to get viewership, readership, or listenership.
It's not going to happen. They might qualify, but it's going to be a season very similar to what we've seen.
I don't think they're going to qualify. I don't think they're going to win another game unless Baltimore rests everybody.
Baltimore could. I mean, that was huge for them last night. It was huge for Baltimore, but it helps Pittsburgh too.
Although if you look at Baltimore, I got to be honest, I know there's risk of injury. If you're the bye team and rest all your guys, which gives them 2 weeks of not playing, it's a good way to lose your rhythm.
It is, but it's also, from my point of view, especially when they're so singularly dependent on Lamar Jackson, even if it's just resting Lamar, it's going to help. And I would rest Lamar.
Yeah, he's the MVP now.
I think so, yeah, especially with the way that, McCaffrey played really well last night for San Francisco, but not as well as Lamar did, not as much of a difference maker as Lamar was.
Yeah, and Purdy imploded. I think he was among those considered, and one game shouldn't cost them, but in a close race it probably will, especially given that they were never going to let him be the MVP in the first place.
Yeah, it might be Lamar, McCaffrey, and Hill at this point. Would probably be the big three. Even like Hill was hurt, and he still got 9 for 99 for the Dolphins the other day.
Yeah, they're not going to give it to a receiver either. It's Lamar in a runaway right now, I think, and deservedly so. He's had a great year, and that stuff where he's 20-1 against NFC teams because they only play him every 4 years and can't draw a beat on him. Playing him so sporadically, that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
It does. I talked about that on the pregame show going into that contest. I thought the Ravens would win, and I thought that would be the reason why. I don't really know that it was the reason why, as it turns out, because Purdy was so bad. I think that game was more about Purdy stinking than it was anything else. But
but everybody overreacted now that San Francisco's not that good. San Francisco's that good. We take the NFL far too seriously. We take every performance by a team and a player far too seriously. Every time a great player has a bad game, he's not what we thought he was, which is ridiculous. Maybe he just had a bad game. Every time a good team has a bad game, it's overreaction. We just take all this far too seriously. We do. I'm almost embarrassed by it. I've never been at the point of caring less about the NFL than I am right now because of the farce it's been turned into via stuff like people are talking about. And
the parody stuff, is that what you mean too?
No, that bothers me, but not as much as just like I see like guys like Skip Bayless saying Brock Purdy stinks. No, Skip Bayless stinks. Brock Purdy's a real good quarterback who had a bad game.
All right, I want to hear from Steelers fans about all of this. You can chime in and post your comments about the playoffs, about the Rudolph versus Pickett debate, although neither of us think it's a debate. You play Rudolph. Let's go back to the game itself, Mark. How well did Rudolph play? Did he play really well, or is it just a matter of, like we said before, that we're not used to seeing good quarterbacking anymore?
I thought it was mostly that he played really well. The thing that impressed me the most about him was he led receivers very cleanly into yards after catch. He hit them right in stride, which is a concept totally foreign to Kenny Pickett. He just never does it. The guys have to catch the ball flat-footed, then they get tackled. Rudolph was leading. Can you imagine what George Pickens is going to think if Pickett starts?
Right. How do you go into that locker room and say we're going back to the guy who was?
I think the locker room rolls its collective eyes if Pickett starts, don't you?
I do, especially the wide receivers, especially Pickett, who was able to be on the receiving end of some deep shots.
Pickens, yeah. And by the way, him having that game was the worst thing that could have happened in some ways because now he is totally and permanently enabled. He quit on a play. He wasn't apologetic. He got the start. He got the biggest game of his pro career. And now all of his past indiscretions are basically okay. In his mind, certainly. afterwards he's posting receipts on social media like he was somehow victimized. George Pickens a piece of crap. I wouldn't want him on my team. He's the anti-team player, and it's straight out of the AB playbook, Tim. Now he has carte blanche to do all that crap indefinitely. Way to go, Coach T.
The discussion was pretty fast and furious during the, 48 hours over the weekend between the Saturday and Sunday games. And then the Steelers go out and win, of course, on Saturday night. It seemed to quell a lot of it. But everybody nationally was kind of jumping on that this might be the end in Pittsburgh for Mike Tomlin bandwagon. And now it seems to have ceased 100% because of the victory. That to me is just way too reactionary for the national media corps, who has long said it's only in Pittsburgh that they're talking about Tomlin leaving, to then get right on board with it and now stop the train immediately because
I'm not talking about Tomlin leaving. Where did they get that from?
Diana Rossini talked about it. Glazer didn't rule it out. Florio for a while finally brought it up that we might be headed to a divorce in Pittsburgh for the first time. It feels real.
Florio also reported that they were looking to an extension.
That's what I said. That's what I'm saying. Now they're flip-flopping right back.
Diana Rossini said they might trade him. Well, they might. I mean, might is such an awful word when it comes to reporting, because it means you're not reporting. You're speculating. I don't think he's going anywhere. I don't think this win has anything to do with it, but it might soften the blow for those who wanted to leave when he stays, especially if he has another winning season by winning one of the last two, which I think might happen. The one I laughed at the most, I think it was RG3, who talked about Tomlin rallying the troops after they lost 3 straight games. Right, because he had nothing to do with losing those prior 3 games. Okay, whenever they win, it's totally Coach T. Whenever they lose, and you can see that narrative being set up too, Tim. Ryan Clark did that on ESPN. That if Tomlin leaves, it'll be because it's what's best for him. He's still a great coach, and being implied is that the Steelers let him down.
He's the one that always gets the ship to shore safely, but we never talk about the fact he's the one that also steered it right into the iceberg.
Yeah, no, he's a terrible coach. Has been for 13 years. I mean, I give the guy credit for one thing, Tim. He's the only coach who has taken the fact that he's in a results-based business and made his results not mean anything.
I want to get some comments from Steelers fans. Make sure you post them. We're going to talk about the Penguins quite a bit too. Last thing to point out on this, Mark, and I think this does underscore something we've mentioned quite a bit about why the Steelers always seem to stay around in the playoff realm, even when they have had lesser teams, even when Tomlin hasn't done a great job coaching them, regardless of 3-game losing streaks that he's rallied from and all that stuff. They might actually finish the season 5-1 in their own division and not make the playoffs. That feels like it should be impossible, but it very much might happen.
Yeah, but that's because the division had a fluky year, Tim, with Burrow getting hurt especially. If Burrow hadn't gotten hurt, the Steelers would have lost twice to Cincinnati, no question.
I just think it shows that, the division in and of itself is stuck in the 1990s, and so is Tomlin, and especially are the Steelers.
I think that's exactly right.
And I think they are able to exploit that, whereas when they play other teams, even lesser teams from the rest of the league, they are very much vulnerable, and that's exactly what bit them in the ass against the Cardinals and against the Patriots. I mean, it's going to...
That said, Tim, you see the groundswell already from the citizens on Twitter. Oh, they're not that far away.
Oh, they're far away. I mean,
I know they are.
They haven't been that far away since what? The 11-game winning streak in 2020?
Tim, if you made me predict right now, I don't think they're going to win a playoff game for the next 3 years at least. Especially this one, then 3 more. No playoff wins. You watch.
Especially if they get stuck in this quarterback quagmire again.
Which they're going to.
They'll probably set themselves
I'll tell you what my instincts tell me to do. I would have my eyes open for a quarterback in the draft if a good one was available, but probably won't be because they're in the mushy middle, which is how they got Pickett in the first place. But I would bring Rudolph back and have him legitimately compete with Pickett for the starting job next year. Maybe Rudolph is capable of that Geno Smith type of renaissance.
Yeah, I mean, that's the guy you want to point to. I think
that's a long shot, but I mean, what else are you going to do? Just hand it to a guy who's had 0 great starts in 24? I mean, Kenny Pickett's whole career is based on a handful of clutch series, and that's it.
And I think that's also the part that we're overlooking in this whole conversation about him coming back is that he wasn't that great at 100% health, and how could he possibly be at 100% coming back from this ankle?
Tim, I can abbreviate that discussion even more. Kenny Pickett simply stinks. Okay? 24 games. That's not a small sample anymore. He stinks.
Let's get the Penguins, Mark. Do they stink?
Maybe. You don't want to lose in Ottawa. You know, you came from 4-2 down, but you shouldn't be 4-2 down in the first place. I always kind of point that out. When a team comes back against a crap team but loses anyway, I take no solace in the loser point because you shouldn't trail 4-2 to Ottawa in the first place. That said, they had their usual problem handling Brady Tkachuk because of how big and, aggressive he is and a skilled player as well. Nedeljkovic played his first bad game in this run of starts, which was going to happen sooner or later. But I think they're going to just miss the playoffs. I think that's where this is headed.
Yeah, they have to go, I think, at least here in these next 4 games, they got to get really hot because they got the Islanders twice, the Caps, and the Bruins, and there's a game against the Blues sandwiched in there on the 30th at home.
I said when they were 4-1, when they'd won 4 or 5 going to the Ottawa game, that they need to come out of this streak 8-2. They need an 8-2 run at some point, so that doesn't leave much margin for error with these next 4 games. They got to win them all.
How do you feel about the Islanders and Washington? In particular, Washington, Mark. I mean, they're going to play them on the 2nd. When it comes
Ovi can't score, they can't lose.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They're winning without Ovechkin scoring at all, and that's not calculating to me. I don't know how they're pulling that off.
Because they tightened up dramatically defensively,
Mm-hmm.
which we refuse to do. We just refuse to do it. We're going to play the way we've always played. There's a lesson there if you want to learn it.
What about the Islanders and Flyers as the last 2 teams in the Metro? Are they both going to fade, do you think? At least the Flyers, they due to come back to earth some? They've lost 2 in a row now.
Depends when the torch effect wears off. Maybe that's happening now. The Islanders ain't very good. They just get a lot of loser points. They've lost 9 times in overtime or shootout. I mean, come on.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's get to some comments here. We'll start things off with Eric, who says Pickett will start because, as Mark often says, it's more important that they be right than doing what's best to win. I agree with that. Like, that's part of their DNA. But there's also the angle that we've discussed, which is they are so averse to ever looking beyond what's directly in front of them.
Well, right. Their 2 primary philosophies are in direct contradiction here. Like, they want to go back to Pickett because that means they're right in having drafted him and started him. But if you want to win the next game, which is always a priority, you got to start Rudolph. I think Tomlin will put off the decision today. Don't you, Tim?
Yeah, because I think he'll see it as a tactical advantage.
Yeah, and also, too, I hope he does because my whole show is prepared for that to happen. and Liverpool play Burnley at 12:30, so there won't be any editing. I'll just ad-lib the whole freaking thing if I have to.
You should just record 2 versions of the show in advance and play one if he goes with a decision and play the other one if he does not go with a decision.
No, not going to. Seems like too much trouble.
How about this for a scenario? I brought this up to somebody, and I said it out loud, and it sounds stupid, but I wouldn't rule it out for them either. What if they stuck with Rudolph to get to the playoffs, then they got in as the 7th seed, and they decided it was more important to get Pickett some playoff experience?
Oh, they would definitely do that. They would definitely. Here's one thing too, Tim.
Like, that sounds stupid, but I don't rule it out happening.
I think Pickett starts against Baltimore no matter what.
Against Baltimore no matter what. What if Rudolph plays well again this week and is a big reason why they beat Seattle?
Because they'll want to dump out of that.
Them beating Seattle, this could all come to an end for both quarterbacks. They just always suck in Seattle. It doesn't matter what the
they're like what? I looked it up. They're 1-7 against Seattle, I think.
Out there.
Seattle.
Yeah, they are
and
usually.
it's a trip west, which they're not always very good at either.
Right. Richard says in no way, shape, or form should Pickett go back in after Rudolph's performance. Then again, this is everything by rote Tomlin that we're talking about.
Yeah, you know what we're not talking enough about, though? The Pickens thing. The fact that he has been enabled moving forward. That we guaranteed recidivism by just letting him off the hook on quitting on a play and not apologizing for it.
Well, yeah, that was the funny part. You just used the key word there, apologizing, because he came out for his post-game comments and sat down at the microphone, and everybody's ready to ask the first question. And media relations director Burt Lawton said, George would like to say something before we get to our Q&A. And he just said, I'm sorry. I didn't say I'm sorry. He said, I know I said some things earlier in the week that might have upset y'all and then kind of rambled into something else. But it was never an apology. It wasn't even a clarification.
Right. And if it was an apology, it was almost to the media, and he did us a favor. I feel sorry for Burt Lawton, a really good guy. And like Jen Milano from the Penguins, awesome lady, great at her job, and she does great, but she's working with people who aren't idiots. I mean, the worst hockey player ever in what we're talking about is not as bad as George Pickens. And George Pickens is far from the worst football player ever. But like I said, Tim, this is straight from the AB handbook.
The worst hockey player ever in terms of what we're talking about just made the Hall of Fame, didn't he? Barrasso.
You know what? I have a lot more respect for Tom Barrasso than I do George Pickens.
Even though he handled himself the way he handled himself?
He always delivered, always put winning first.
This is Pete, who says if playoff teams could pick who they play, they would all pick the Steelers. Maybe the Texans without C.J. Stroud, but I mean, C.J. Stroud, if they're going to make it, C.J. Stroud's going to have to come back. That's the difference.
They're not going to make it. Their run's over.
The Texans, you think? So you think it'll be
yeah.
Well, you think it'll go Cleveland is the top wild card, then the middle team will be the second team in the AFC East, and then the seventh team will be the Colts?
Something like that. Yeah, I think Houston, even if Stroud comes back, I think their momentum has been broken.
See, here's the AFC South thing, Mark. Pittsburgh wins out. Jacksonville loses or ties one game. Indianapolis and Houston, both of them don't finish with 10 wins. So basically, they would have to finish.
But they play each other.
Yeah, so one of them would have to finish with only 9 wins.
So my scenario is correct. That if the Steelers win out and Jacksonville loses or ties, the Steelers are in.
That would then put the other team with 10 wins in first place with Jacksonville losing and falling down. Right.
Right, exactly. See?
If the Steelers were to win out against the Seahawks and against the Ravens, and Ravens winning yesterday certainly does help because now they're one step removed from not having to play their starters in the last week of the season.
And then if the Steelers get in the playoffs, Tim, they can beat anybody.
I don't know. Where did you see that? Who was saying that exactly?
Filippone.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I wouldn't be afraid to play Kansas City. Okay.
Oh, I'm not afraid, but I mean, like, they're going to win. Kansas City's going to be able to dial it up against this. I know yesterday looked really bad for it did look really bad for the Chiefs, but Mahomes is just trying to do everything now, and it's imploding on him is the problem. But I wouldn't worry about that against the Steelers.
In the vein of George Pickens, Tim, I'd like to say to everybody listening right now, if it looks like I'm tired of all this, I am.
Russ says, hearing talk of trades for Belichick in New England, too. What are your guys' thoughts on Belichick? What would he do?
Belichick's 109 years old. Who the hell would trade for him?
I got this in my email, too, about a swap for the two of them. I don't think either team has any interest in having the other, in large part because of Belichick's age, and in large part because I think New England has seen Tomlin lose to them with so many lesser versions of their team the last few years.
All the trade talk's done. The trade talk's not going to happen. It just is not going to happen. The Steelers aren't going to trade Mike Tomlin. For one thing, he'd have to agree to it. And two, a coach isn't going to want to go to a team that's in trouble to begin with, like Carolina or Washington, and they have to give up a key draft pick to get him, thereby sabotaging the team he's going to.
Well, multiple picks. It would be more than just a pick. It would be significant draft capital going back the other way. So why don't you just sit out a year and then come back and have your pick without having to worry about that team giving up all the capital it gets you?
If I were Art II, I'd make a farce of it, which Art's pretty good at doing. I would say, listen, I want all your picks forever. Not just this year. I want all your picks in perpetuity.
You can only acquire players through trade and free agency. That's
exactly right. I want all your picks.
Jeff says this QB situation reminds me of the 92 Steelers playoff game. Bubby Brister was coming off an excellent game against the Browns, but O'Donnell got the start against the Bills. O'Donnell had a terrible game. The Steelers lost the game, only scored 3 points. I see the same thing happening. Pickett will get the start in the playoffs.
Yeah, that's all I think about is what happened with the Steelers in the 92 playoffs.
Actually, what I'm thinking about the Steelers is 1988 when they had to play 3 different quarterbacks. That's kind of where they are right now.
Tim. My hair won't. I look bad.
Why do you think you look bad? Your hair?
My hair's all over the place. Like what hair? I'm starting to go bald too. Look, I'm starting to thin a little bit.
Oh, I'm thinning way up. I'm thinning in the back.
This is bad.
That's why I wear a cap all the time. Ron says it looks to me like Ryan Graves is playing scared.
I know. I'm scared when he's out there. Yeah,
you're watching scared.
You know what's amazing is like, and I hate to say this because he's a really good guy, okay, but he's awful so far. Like him, Hornet, and O'Connor are all like well over 6 foot. They don't have an ounce of testosterone between them. Like they just don't play with any aggression whatsoever.
You know what his signing reminded me of, Mark, because everybody had such a great reaction to it here. Oh, what a great partner he's going to be for Letang. Can keep up the minutes with Letang, et cetera, et cetera. It felt to me, though, just in reading reaction to it and anything posted by Devils fans, it was kind of like when the Steelers went out and got like Siamalu or Cole Holcomb or Landon Roberts. It's not like the other fan base was, oh, no, what are we going to do without this guy? Like that didn't happen. I didn't see a lot of reaction like, oh no, what are we going to do without Ryan Graves?
Now, where they got a little lucky is that Ludwig's turned out to be a real good player.
And that's offset it, you think?
No, I don't think it's offsetting, but it helps. Mm-hmm. I mean, I would think about kind of sliding Ludwig into the top 4, but he might be one of those guys that less is more. So I don't know what I'd do there. I think you just have to keep probably hoping Graves plays better.
Boss says Mike Tomlin is the manure messiah. Everything out of him is utter bull, you know what.
As opposed to spelling manure correctly, yes.
And then Richard says, if the Pens had even just an average power play, they would be sitting atop a playoff spot. Well, when the power play was slightly above average, they won 3 of 4. So that's an indication that, yes.
If the Penguins had an average power play, Sidney Crosby would be MVP.
Yeah, he's playing really well. Do you like what they did with him finally on the power play, moving him over to the left side?
You know who the guy that's killing the power play is now is Carlson.
Not shooting enough?
He won't shoot. And the other team has figured out, okay, just don't let him go. Man up on everybody else, pretty much.
What are you seeing from Nedeljkovic when he goes wrong? What's his fatal flaw?
I don't think he's gone wrong. I just think he had a not so good game at Ottawa, but I don't see a flaw per se.
The defensemen must like playing for him because he handles the puck well and he goes out and gets it so they don't get hit.
Yeah, well, that's the positive. Jari thinks he handles the puck well, which makes it even worse. But no, I think Ned's played pretty good, but I think he might be another guy for whom less is more.
All right, Mark, so you're back on the air today. So is this going to be a soccer schizophrenia show, or will it be over by the time you get on the air?
No, it'll be over, which sucks worse because that way I have to pay attention to the show. And like I said, if Tomlin says that Pickett's starting, then like it ruins the whole show.
Well, no, it doesn't ruin today. It might ruin the week. Today would be set. The rest of the week.
No, because I prepared it as if the decision's not been made. Okay, so I'd have to like ad-lib over a lot of stuff, but I refuse to not watch Burnley and Liverpool because, at 62, I turn 63 later this week. I have my priorities firmly in order, especially now that Liverpool have drawn 2 straight at home, each time missing a chance to go into first place. The Arsenal draw, I get. That was a great game, and that's who we're chasing for first, 1 point behind. But drawing Man U was 0-0 because they parked the bus was depressing. But as always, I live in hope. If you'd have told me at Christmas time you'll be 1 point off the lead with a totally rebuilt midfield, I'd be very happy with that, and I am. I just, as always, I hope for more.
Steelers fans, you can hope for more. We'll see what you get today from Mike Tomlin at noon. The press conference is coming up. Mark is on at 3 o'clock, and we'll figure out what we're doing for Madden Monday and Madden Benz Unfiltered around New Year's.
What we need to have happen, Tim, is for the Steelers and Liverpool to play at the same time so I could pointedly not watch the Steelers.
Who knows? With the way they're screwing with the playoff schedule, that very well may happen. All right, so we'll be back next week. We'll let you know what the schedule is. We work around New Year's Eve and all that. And we'll figure out if the Steelers are still alive. That's coming up next week on Madden Benz Unfiltered.